Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
And now, the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton, sponsored by GEHA.
Welcome to the Federal Drive on Federal News Network. It's Wednesday, June 24th. I'm your host, Terry Gerton, and I'm glad you're here. Coming up on this hour of the Federal Drive, for years, commercial drones have been limited by how far operators can actually see them. That is about to change. And as drones take on a bigger role in the airspace, the rules around them are getting more complicated, but also more coordinated than you might expect. Those stories and much more ahead during this hour of the Federal Drive. We begin with this. The wait is over for more than 1,400 vendors. NASA's SEWP program office awarded spots on its sixth iteration of its government-wide technology contract. In all, NASA made more than 2,100 awards under this government-wide acquisition contract for IT products and services. For more on the SEWP 6 awards, Federal News Network's executive editor, Jason Miller, joins me now. Jason, you've brought details on a fascinating topic. Thanks for being here.
Oh, my pleasure, Terry.
All right, before we start, though, let's remind folks what the SEWP program provides to agencies and how SEWP 6 is different from previous versions.
So SEWP has been around since the late 90s. It was one of the first government-wide acquisition contracts for technology. And specifically, when NASA launched this, it was very focused on scientific and engineering problems. And a lot of IT hardware, early 90s and early iterations of SEWP were very kind of NASA only. And then over time, it grew and grew and grew. And today, it's one of the most popular contracts across the entire government. It has a low fee. It's easy to use. And, Joanne Wojtek, the program director at SEWP, will tell you they're doing everything they can to kind of continue to iterate and evolve. And SEWP 6 is another iteration of this government-wide acquisition contract. And what's different about SEWP 6 than previous versions is they're actually going into the services arena. Previously, it was very much product focused with some services. This is very much products and services. And that's a big difference because in the past, a lot of the services type contracts for especially government-wide acquisition type contracts were really focused only at GSA and, of course, an NIH NITAC contract with CIOSP3 and previously. So, if you will, NASA SEWP is going into an area that's different for them. The second big change is you said at the top more than 2,100 awards. Just for comparison, SEWP 5, when it was awarded in May 2015, 197 awards. I don't do math, you know that, Terry, but that's a lot more for SEWP 6 than SEWP 5.
When you think about those 2,100 awards, Jason, how did they break down by category across the contract?
The way they released the RFP was 3 separate categories, and you could bid on more than one category for sure. So I'll go through them real quickly. Category A, as they called it. Now, this is more traditional SEWP, what you've seen with products, IT and communications, audiovisual services, products, cloud-based services, installation, integration, testing, training, maintenance, and like. They made 364 awards under Category A. Category B, this is what they called enterprise-wide strategic solutions to improve and enhance that same IT category capabilities and AV infrastructure. Again, does include some products and services, cloud computing, managed services such as for printer computer services, including agency-wide help desk ticketing systems. For Category B, they made 692 awards. I know you're doing math in your head, Terry. I can see it. And then for finally, Category C. Now, this is the big change. They made more than 1,000 awards, 1,059. And this is for what they called mission-based services, a full range of technology services, anything from computer programming services to telecom to network operations to data processing and analysis services, hosting, consulting services, digital government services, and, of course, cybersecurity and system security services. So in all, they made about 1,059 awards for Category C. Now, when you break that down even further and you go across all the different awards they made about 80% of those in Category A were small businesses and 88% in Category B were small businesses. And, of course, they break down through the socioeconomic categories as well. So as you can tell, the thing about NASA SEWP over the years was very supportive of small businesses. And they continue that just with a lot more awards, probably the biggest awards they've ever made for NASA.
Jason, one of the things we've been watching under the Trump administration is GSA's effort to centralize service contracts. How does that compare with Category C here?
There's been a lot of discussion about whether or not NASA SOUP will move to GSA or not. About a year ago, there's a big hubbub. Everyone was like, yeah, it's going to move. And then it was like, well, maybe it won't move. Well, maybe it will move later. Maybe it won't move at all. We're still in that. We don't know whether it's going to move. But SOUP has for a long time been a best-in-class contract as categorized by the Office of Management and Budget. I think there will continue to be a best-in-class contract, so a preferred source. We're also waiting on some more information from the Office of Federal Procurement Policy about what does mandatory sources of supply look like these days, and whether or not things like NASA SOUP, like the GSA schedules, like Alliant 3, so on and so forth, will become part of that. Hey, you must start here and then work down versus make your own contract. So I think this bodes well for having a big contract with lots of different areas to provide services and products for the agency. So I would assume NASA SOUP will continue down this path, and whether they move to GSA or not, we don't know yet.
Well, given that assumption, then, what's the timeline to get SOUP 6 open for business?
What Joanne Wojtek told me was the goal is November 1st. We want to make this open for business. Now, at the same time, SOUP 5, they're going to extend this through January of 2027. So right now, SOUP 5 is supposed to end in the end of September. They're going to extend it another several months. So there's going to be some overlap. And also, it's a way for agencies to get through the end of the fiscal year. So fiscal year 2026 and begin fiscal 2027. And meanwhile, they have time to ramp up SOUP 6, get the vendors ready, get the ordering ready. It's a much bigger lift for 2,100 awards, almost 1,500 contractors than the initial SOUP 5, which was only about 140 contractors and 197 awards.
That sounds so rational, but I have to ask, are protests possible here?
I guess protests are always possible, so let's start there. But I think NASA is fairly confident that it has made through the gauntlet of protests. And the reason why is the way NASA set up the evaluations of bids, and they got several thousand bids, and it's been an ongoing program for, the solicitation has been ongoing for about 2 years or more, is they've gone through several iterations of protests through the Government Accountability Office already. And of the 16 protests they've gotten for SOUP 6, 6 have been denied, 9 have been dismissed, which means that they've made corrective action in some way or shape or form. And there's still one protest that is outstanding that should be decided no later than July 22nd. Could there be more protests? Possibly. But I would say that I think NASA is fairly confident that they have crossed their T's, dotted their I's, done everything they could. And for the most part, they believe that a lot of the protests were taken care of as each vendor had to go through gate 1, gate 2, gate 3 to get to this final award phase.
So what will the vendors be watching for over the next couple of months?
NASA's still got to go through the final sets of award phases, right? Make sure that you said you're in NAICS code XYZ. Yes, you are in XYZ. You said you're a small business. Yes, you qualify for a small business. So that is all the pieces and parts that's going to lead up to this November 1st effort. Joanne Wojtek told me, she spent the last day and a half just looking at emails, making sure everyone's email was correct as they sent out these award notices. For having this many awards, there's a lot of work that has to get done to get to that November 1st date of launch. This has been a long process. Over 2 years, they've had 14 different amendments. They had protests and concerns, over 6,700 questions on the RFP. These things are never easy. So to get to this point where they're at today took a huge Herculean effort by the NASA program office. And to their credit, 16 awards in the overall scheme of things doesn't sound like a lot, considering when you look at something like CIOSP4 that NITEC eventually had to cancel, they had hundreds of awards. And now I'm not comparing, they're not the same contract in any regards, but I think, to NASA's point, they've always ran a very tight program. And I think having a low number of awards for the thousands of bids that they got is a pretty good sign.
That's Federal News Network's executive editor, Jason Miller. Jason, thanks for the story.
Always a pleasure.
You can find all the details at federalnewsnetwork.com. Up next, for years, commercial drones have been limited by how far operators can actually see them, but that is about to change. This is The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network.
Tune in Tuesdays at 10:30 a.m. and 2:30 p.m. for the Innovation in Government Show, sponsored by Carasoft. Hear from the industry leaders advancing the technologies shaping how agencies modernize secure operations and deliver better services. Innovation in Government covers what is changing now, what is working from cybersecurity and cloud to data, AI, and emerging technologies. Listen to Innovation in Government, Tuesdays at 10:30 a.m. and 2:30 p.m. on Federal News Network. Search innovation in government.
Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. A new FAA framework could allow drone operators to fly beyond visual line of sight, opening the door to expanded use in infrastructure inspection, agriculture, and emergency response. The shift would move drone operations closer to routine use across the national airspace. Joining me to explain the impact and the integration challenge is former senior executive in the FAA's National Security Division, Jose Martinez. Mr. Martinez, thank you so much for joining me today.
Terry, thank you for having me today.
We're going to talk about drones. We've been talking about drones a lot, but you have some particular expertise that we want to explore about the change to the limitation on drones around line of sight. They have been historically limited by the line of sight rules, but now the FAA has a new framework to allow them to fly beyond a visual line of sight. First of all, tell us about what motivated that change, and second of all, how the FAA is approaching it.
Well, thank you again. I've spent the better part of 3 decades inside the federal military systems, including running crisis response at the FAA's National Security Division. So what beyond visual line of sight really means, it's a multifaceted effort and multifaceted story. It's a technology story, it's a government capability story, and an industry story. What it is not a Part 107 commercial friends with benefits. It is a completely new framework. So we have to level set our perspective and stop looking backward at Part 107 because it is our closest point of reference, and look forward actually to the future of advanced air mobility. That is actually where the framework is moving towards.
You're describing a really significant shift in concept, and sometimes the government does not make those kind of shifts very smoothly. What have you seen in how the FAA is planning for this new mode?
The inflection point that we are at is almost akin to when helicopters were introduced after World War II, where they came up as a military resource and then got segmented into regular aviation. So what we're looking at is the FAA is using this rule to draw the boundaries of what advanced air mobility will be, giving enough buffer within it to accommodate things like commercial drones up to a certain weight, air taxis that are coming in the next couple of years that are prototype flying right now. And so everyone is zoomed in to Part 108 as it relates to smallish drones, but the FAA is zoomed out into what the ecosystem is going to be.
You mentioned a couple of things there, including air taxis. When you think about real-world applications of the beyond visual line of sight framework, where does it begin to make the biggest difference? Can you give us a couple of examples?
Sure. The biggest immediate gain will be to the federal government, and that will be in several forms. The federal government and federal government agencies have capabilities now where they pilot drones. And so the immediate kind of overnight will be implementing operational capabilities that will remove the necessity to have that pilot and then bring on more resources at a lower cost, covered under less paperwork, and streamlined for efficiency. It will also create, as we've seen in government, that there will be in-house capability and then there will be outside capability where they will bring in private industry. So this is set to drive competition, open up the door for competition that will breed innovation in this space. And then it will kind of loop around and keep moving things progressively upward.
Jose Martinez is a former senior executive of the Federal Aviation Administration's National Security Division. So, Mr. Martinez, this is not just about letting drones fly farther. It's really about integrating them into shared airspace. And so what has to be in place for that to work safely at scale?
Well, at scale, there are two things at play right now. And very smartly, the FAA has realized it needed to modernize its national airspace system. That is in the works right now, and it will drastically change for the better how air traffic is managed well into the future. What they're doing with the management of the drones is establishing a mechanism by having providers. They will be internal and external, depending on whether the government is using them or private industry is using them, to help tie in the management of the routes and what the drones are doing. And so for the drones specifically, it mandating that the drones pump out their remote ID, that they receive anyone that has the technology for what's called automatic dependent surveillance broadcast, ADSB. So it knows what's going on and can operate in the space. I think in closing here is we need to move away from the from the thought that these Part 108 drone activities will be somehow intermingled with the commercial air and all these others. Think of it as a layer cake. And, at the very lowest level, you'll have these drones operating. And then above them, first responders and law enforcement. Above them, it will increase until you reach commercial air traffic. These drones will not operate within those spaces.
One of the things we've been talking about as we think about drones and new aviation technology is that oftentimes the technology moves faster than the FAA's ability to regulate and the infrastructure's ability to respond. How do you see that showing up for drones right now?
Well, I think it's expected. And I think it's one of the reasons why the FAA has taken its time to receive as much comments as possible on this proposed rule change. I think the folks that have a dog in the fight would like it to move a little bit quicker and maybe want some mandates that help them out. But the FAA has learned from its past, right? So they are not trying to be the Wright brothers that can stifle innovation by holding the reins too tightly. And so, rightly so, they have pushed out, they have crowdsourced the technology and the data ahead and made projections. And so they've had, luckily for us, there's thousands of drone flights per day. The FAA has gathered all that information and has used what it knows about safety and using what it knows about traditional aviation, and is now saying, okay, we are not trying to replace one with the other. This is a completely new class of aviation. Do not think of it as Part 107. Do not think of it as a plane or a helicopter. It's its own thing.
And as the FAA is opening up this beyond visual line of sight operation for drones, it's also proposing new restrictions around critical infrastructure and where drones can be around sites that are designated as critical infrastructure. How do you see these two pieces fitting together?
Well, I think they did the right thing by reopening this portion for commentary. There was a lot of pushback on it because I think on the front end, the folks that are in the space of critical infrastructure would like to dictate what can and cannot be done. And that might not always work. So the FAA initially put out language that was designed to get commentary. It did. And now it will weigh the future of this capability with the concerns and the needs of the government and industry and how it operates. And so I think they're doing the right thing. I believe the balance will be struck there. I think you're going to see, instead of a black and white yes or no, I think you'll see maybe some requirements being put there. Yes, you can do it. Maybe not a whole lot of red tape and bureaucracy in order to do it, so that the streamlined vision of Part 108 can continue to move forward.
And what will you be watching to make sure that this new regulatory framework is having the desired both safety and innovation protection effects that you're hoping for?
I think the thing that I will be looking for are where the concessions are made. I don't believe that any safety adjustments will be made, or adjustments will be made that will kind of make things unsafe. The technology already makes that somewhat difficult to do, to backtrack. And so what I will be looking for is how much bureaucracy squeaks in or squeaks out, because really the intent is to have Part 107 be Part 107. We will see piloted drone activity decrease, but it won't go away. So the 108 is not replacing 107, so you'll still have that going on. And there are provisions for a category of recreational operations under 108. So I'm actually looking towards that category. How will the previously pilots segue into 108 and be recreational inside that space, while Amazon's doing deliveries and that sort of thing, and folks are doing agriculture? I think I'd like to see how that transition happens. I think the rest of it will even out as more players come into the field.
Jose Martinez is a former senior executive of the Federal Aviation Administration's National Security Division. Really appreciate you joining me today. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Terry. It's been a pleasure.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Listen to the Federal Drive on your schedule. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Still to come, electric aircraft are coming, but the rules that allow them to fly are not. But first, as drones take on a bigger role in the airspace, the rules around them are getting more complicated, but also more coordinated than you might expect. You're listening to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. As drone operations expand, regulation could easily fragment across the FAA, the Department of Homeland Security, Defense, and others. Instead, there's growing coordination to manage both safety and security across that system. Katie Inman, a partner at Holland & Knight, walks us through how that's taking shape. Katie, it's great to have you on the show. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you, Terry, for having me.
There's some interesting regulation happening right now around drones, both from the FAA and the FCC. What's driving the urgency at this particular moment?
Yes, great question. I think a number of things. We saw roughly a year ago the president issue a couple of executive orders that really prompted some momentum, and we've seen that momentum throughout this past year, and we will continue to see it, I think, in the upcoming months. From the FAA side and the FCC side, we're seeing a common theme, and that's security, national security. We're seeing concerns, and the federal government's very, forthright with that, saying, hey, we're concerned and we want to be sure that we've got the appropriate risk mitigations in place.
Drones have typically been treated as commercial technology. What has changed in the environment that is now bringing that security concern front and center?
Well, there's still very much commercial technology and, just wonderful innovative solutions. We've seen over the years drones being used for avalanche control and for weather research and search and rescue, just a number of wonderful tools that, a number of wonderful uses, and law enforcement using them as a tool as well. But I think that really it's just law enforcement and national security coming together and saying, wait a minute, these technological innovations and these tools can be used very negatively. I think the federal government's known that for a while now, but I think just recent international activities and whatnot have maybe prompted a little bit more concern.
And the FAA and the FCC seem like really different sides of the drone issue. How do their roles fit together here?
Well, that's a great question and a great observation. You're right. FAA and FCC both very much have a role in drone regulation. And the reason for that is because the FAA is authorized and responsible for ensuring safety in the national airspace system, the entire national airspace system. The management of that system and the safety oversight of it belongs to the FAA, unquestionably, whereas the FCC oversees the spectrum and communications side of radio frequency devices. And of course, I'm using a lot of terms here and somewhat boiling it down, but please just be assured that anytime a radio frequency device wants to operate or the objective is to import it or use it or market it, in the U.S., that radio frequency device is going to need an equipment authorization, and the operation of it will need to occur on an appropriate spectrum. And there are two types, licensed or unlicensed. And so in that regard, FCC really oversees the communications side, which is very important. Whereas the FAA oversees airspace safety. The two very much converge when it comes to drones. And the FAA and the FCC work very well together in ensuring that both of the agencies are really, getting to their best of their responsibilities, and they're delivering on their objectives here. And not contradicting one another. Because the roles are so different, we see an absence of contradiction, of course, we see them working very well together in my experience.
And Katie, some of these authorities that are being captured in this new rulemaking have been sitting there for years. Why are they really just now coming together?
Oh, thank you. Yes, I believe we are discussing the Section 2209 rulemaking from the 2016 statute called the FAA Extension Safety and Security Act. You're right. That's been a long time coming. The president mentioned it in his last year's executive order. And then, of course, folks have been talking about it for quite some time. I don't know exactly what the holdup was. In my experience at the FAA, I know that it was very much an objective and a goal that the agency was trying to deliver on. As with anything, you can see challenges that can come up. But here, what that Section 2209 did was require the FAA to issue rules to establish a process for restricting drone flights over critical infrastructure. So the definition of critical infrastructure really posed a lot of challenges for the FAA. And in this proposed rule, the comments for which are due July 6th, the FAA seeks to define critical infrastructure using an existing statute and then proposing a process for folks to say, hey, I think I have critical infrastructure here. I fit within one of 16 sectors that's in the FAA's proposed rule. And I'm going to go through the process and try to get my critical infrastructure site named to be part of a UAFR, which is Unmanned Aircraft Flight Restricted Area. There are two types of those, a special and a standard. The standard one is going to be one of those 16 areas and really functions as sort of a no trespassing sign, some folks have said. So the drone is not going to be allowed to enter into this area without first giving notification to the critical infrastructure owner or proprietor. And then the second is a little bit more exclusive, special UAFR. And for that one, drone operations would largely be prohibited unless you receive affirmative permission to get in that area. And it likely will be pretty narrow permission. So that's a proposed rule that's out there right now for comment. You can see the public comments on the public docket, and those are very worthwhile. Review of those is very worthwhile. I think it's a good idea to stay involved and submit a comment if you'd like to have your voice heard on that. But that is a proposed rule that's currently under development right now. But Terry, there are other things too that FAA has done or is in the process of doing related to drones and security as well. They've got the Beyond Visual Line of Sight rulemaking that they proposed last fall. And comment period is closed on that, but we expect to see some sort of movement on it relatively soon, I think. But I'm mentioning that within the context of security because it's worthwhile to note that the FAA is not the only agency that proposed this rule. It's a joint rule between the FAA and the TSA from the Department of Homeland Security. So you've got both sets of authority coming together to allow for, or propose to allow for, drones that are pretty heavy, weighing up to 1,320 pounds is the proposal, to operate beyond visual line of sight. And of course, security vetting from the TSA would be required in many circumstances. And then right now, as we speak, we've seen some security measures come out just recently from FAA that are in effect right now. And these have to do with establishing temporary flight restrictions over the FIFA World Cup locations. And there are a number of those, of course, and very stiff penalties that the FAA is warning about. So FAA is taking a really wholesome approach, I guess I should say, a really comprehensive approach to making sure that it's addressing the security needs. And at the same time, FCC has done other things as well to address security measures. It's, got the covered list, which is a list of entities in which equipment authorizations are not going to be allowed, so that, drones will not be able to get an equipment authorization for a new model of a UAS for which it would need an equipment authorization if that drone is produced overseas or contains critical components that are foreign produced. So that's a really robust security measure as well that we see. So in addition to what we've seen most recently with the 2209 rulemaking and the FCC request for comments, in their public notice regarding just modernizing obsolete regulations, we've seen these other ongoing, very recent measures as well. So we're seeing a really comprehensive approach here for drone security.
Katie Inman is a partner at Holland and Knight. Katie, that is a great rundown of sort of all the different aspects of the drone regulation space right now. Something that you said as you walked through that really triggered an image in my mind that you talked about a no trespassing sign. And I'm imagining that in the air and thinking about how that would actually play out. If you take all of those rules together, what does that really change for operations, drone operators, and what they might do with these and how they might use them in practice?
Oh, thank you, Terry. That's a great question, because in practical terms, what should people do to address the changing landscape that we have here with drones? And my number one recommendation would be just know what you're doing. Check before you go. Don't just fly a drone up there thinking, this is no big deal, I'm just having fun. No, there are many rules that apply to that drone operation, whether it's Part 107, whether you're recreational, what have you. The drone needs to be registered unless it's extremely lightweight, at a minimum, and other capabilities need to be on it normally, such as remote identification, which would allow the FAA to obtain information from that drone as it's operating and know who the drone is registered to. So that's an additional security measure. But and then of course checking for the temporary flight restrictions and those zones. The wonderful thing about drone operations right now is that a number of apps are available, and the FAA keeps a very great website on this called Before You Fly. And so just checking that website and educating yourself, making sure you know what you're doing before you get out there I just can't emphasize that enough. And then, of course, if you're a drone operator who wants to make your voice heard, there are a number of ways to do that, making sure that you know what rules are being proposed and commenting on them. That's the beauty of the Administrative Procedure Act. So folks can really get involved in the conversation very easily. But overall, in practical terms, when it comes to operating, I would suggest just staying very much involved and on top of things like the Before You Fly website that FAA puts out, and just tracking as many updates as you can, especially before you operate.
And as you've described it, the universe that's concerned about these is everything from the individual recreational drone pilot to commercial drone operators to the owners and operators of this critical infrastructure. What pulls them all together sort of into a unified communication space?
If they have all common goals, such as making sure that drone operations can occur, making sure that, innovation is not curtailed, but at the same time, drones are able to safely and securely operate, I think almost everybody can get behind that mission. Of course, you're going to have some bad actors out there, and the federal government appears to be doing a great job on making sure that they're halting any sorts of concerns in that regard. But for those of us who are drone operators or care about, drone development here, regardless of whether they're a critical infrastructure owner or a drone operator themselves or a manufacturer, I think we can all get around the one common goal of making sure drones are safe. They're not posing a threat to other aircraft in the national airspace system. That common mission will bring everyone together.
Katie Inman is a partner at Holland & Knight. Katie, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Terry. It's been my pleasure.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. Up next, electric aircraft are coming. The rules that will allow them to fly are not. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. It's not just drones pushing aviation into new territory. Electric aircraft are edging closer to commercial use, but certification is still the gatekeeper. The FAA is trying to adapt existing rules while building a longer-term framework that can scale with new designs and risks. Joining me to explain that tension is Derek Collins, Director of GAO's Physical Infrastructure Team. Mr. Collins, it's great to have you back. Thanks for joining me.
Happy to be here.
You have put out a new report with GAO looking at how the FAA is planning to certify and regulate electric aircraft. To be clear, this is not drones. This is planes that are powered by batteries, right?
Correct. So electric aircraft differ from conventional aircraft in that they use battery-powered electric motors rather than fuel combustion engines to fully drive or partially drive the aircraft's propellers or turbines. And so aviation manufacturers are currently developing fully electric and hybrid electric aircraft, mostly for short range and medium range distances. They vary widely in design. Some require a runway for takeoff, others take off vertically, for example, from the top of a building. And there's a wide variety of potential uses for these aircraft, including air taxis, regional and rural air service, pilot training, and medical transport.
Feels like we're finally at our Jetson moment with flying taxis. But what makes these different for FAA to certify and regulate?
So, one of the key challenges is getting the aircraft certified. And given their design, which includes features of fixed-wing aircraft and helicopters, the aircraft must pass multiple airworthiness standards, which is why FAA is certifying designs on a case-by-case basis. And another key point is electric propulsion is a new technology, so it isn't an explicit part of the current airworthiness standards. And so FAA has to do this on a case-by-case basis and develop special conditions, which are project-specific alternatives to confirm that the new technology will provide the same level of safety as a conventional product.
How urgent is this need? How close is industry to being able to say, hey, we have fleets that are ready to fly. Can you get the regulations ready?
So in brief, it may be a while. As of March, FAA was evaluating electric aircraft and engine designs, as I said, on a case-by-case basis. And the agency's yet to certify a crewed electric aircraft. And it's unclear when these aircraft will actually be able to operate commercially. Now, to help streamline reviews, FAA is considering some regulatory changes to help standardize its approach to evaluating these products in the long term.
What does that interim approach where they're using current certification processes on a case by case and trying to stretch and figure out where what they currently have fits these. How is that working, and where does that break down? What does it not cover?
So I think the challenge for FAA, at least from the perspective of the manufacturers, is having the available expertise. And so what we heard from manufacturers and industry is that FAA continually needs to ensure that it has the expertise in-house to help manage the certification process and address the new technologies.
When you say expertise, what are the most challenging areas to get that? Is it around batteries? Is it propulsion? Is it integration of the whole system?
It's hiring engineers in disciplines like propulsion. And so FAA has acknowledged that additional staff are needed, and they've been taking steps to hire engineers in those disciplines. Now, taking a step back, we've provided recommendations in the past to FAA on how to help ensure that its workforce has the skills to best respond to changing technology.
Is this a place where there might be industry-government exchange or collaboration, and recognizing that this is still such an emerging technology?
We do see staff move from industry to government, and more broadly, in terms of research, there's a lot of research out there that is funded by the government but carried out by others in this space.
Derek Collins is a director in the physical infrastructure team at GAO. So, Mr. Collins, beyond workforce, the need also points to some infrastructure challenges in terms of broadening the capacity to actually deploy fleets of aircraft. Where does FAA get involved, say, in charging stations or those kinds of support structures?
Well, first of all, infrastructure is a key challenge that we found in our work. And according to FAA, only 47 airports had actually planned for charging stations for electric aircraft as of the end of 2025. Now, airports face several challenges with installing the infrastructure needed, including high startup costs for charging infrastructure, uncertainty about demand, and availability of reliable electricity. So, for example, airports may need dedicated electric transformers or large-scale battery energy storage systems in order to support electric aircraft.
Electric aircraft feel like electric cars. It's not a matter of if, but when. And so as FAA is thinking about this, we've talked so far about just sort of getting the planes up in the air. What do you have to do to certify that they're flight worthy? But longer term, there's got to be a regulatory regime around this category of aircraft and how it integrates with what we already fly. So how is FAA approaching the long-term regulatory challenges?
So that's the third key challenge here, is that FAA ultimately will need to develop guidance to safely integrate the aircraft into the national airspace system. And so one step that they're taking is through a pilot program. So in March, they selected 8 pilot projects across 26 states. And so through this pilot project, they hope to gather data and information that can help them in the development of guidance to help safely integrate electric aircraft into the national airspace system.
What are the big open questions that a regulatory framework is going to have to address?
Well, I think one of the key things is, as you noted, airspace is already congested. And so really making sure that the aircraft can be integrated in a seamless way and maintain safety for, passengers, cargo, and overall maintaining the safety of the national airspace system.
The report talks about the potential utility for electric aircraft, especially in rural areas where they can make short hops and address communities that aren't served by a major metropolitan airport. That makes me think of, folks who fly little two-prop private planes or something like that, and there's always challenges there. How would that regulatory framework address sort of regional deployment?
So regional deployment is one of the significant potential benefits for electric aircraft and can be a game changer for regional and rural airports and being able to connect citizens to the national aviation system. And regional and general aviation airports also may be some of the most desirable locations for early integration of electric aircraft because these airports have less congested airspace and more land available for ground infrastructure. And so any guidance that FAA would put out would have similar safety guidance as it would for any other airport.
And so as we move closer to deployment and commercial use of electric aircraft, what will tell us that the system is working? What should we be looking at in terms of certification pace or safety assurance or industry adoption?
So the key thing there is the certification and making sure that the aircraft are airworthy and safety, and then can be safely integrated into the national airspace system. It's really hard to speak specific to timing on that and pacing. I think the biggest concern is safety and making sure that we can integrate the aircraft safely into the system.
I assume GAO will be coming back to check on the progress there.
Yes, our clients are very interested in this work, and I'm certain we'll get to circle back at some point in time.
Derek Collins is a director in the physical infrastructure team at GAO. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Terry.
We'll post this interview and a link to the report at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. As the summer wildfire season gets underway, federal wildland firefighters are facing an increasingly difficult situation on the job. 3 out of 4 respondents to a recent survey say they have considered quitting within the past 12 months. That comes as frontline workers face increasing burnout and low morale. Here with more is Federal News Network's Drew Friedman. Drew, thanks for joining me today.
Nice to be with you, Terry.
Who conducted this survey and what were some of the big headlines?
This survey comes from an organization called Grassroots Wildland Firefighters, and they developed the survey in partnership with the National Federation of Federal Employees, which is one of the big unions that represents federal wildland firefighters. Some of the findings from this survey, which had about 800 responses, show that work-life balance, burnout, and low pay are common concerns among a lot of wildland firefighters and driving some to, as you mentioned, consider quitting their jobs. About 11% of survey respondents said they would recommend a career as a wildland firefighter, and just about 22% said that they would not recommend the job at all. So these survey results show a workforce that is struggling to some extent. And of course, this comes as we're seeing wildfire season get underway and intensify in the coming months. I spoke recently with Reva Duncan, who is president of Grassroots Wildland Firefighters and a retired firefighter herself. She gave her reaction to some of the responses here.
We were really surprised at how many people responded to the survey. We did not expect that number of people to respond to the survey. People want to be heard. They want their voices to be heard. They want to speak up. They want to talk about the issues they're facing. I think that's indicative of a workforce that is struggling.
Drew, these issues have been going on for a while, if anybody's been following the issue of wildland firefighters. Kind of what has been the trend here?
These issues, it's true, have been concerns for wildland firefighters for a long time. Concerns like excessive overtime hours, understaffing, inadequate pay and benefits, and that often leads to stress, burnout, difficulties with recruitment and retention, and just generally low workforce morale. If you look back to a 2022 report from the Government Accountability Office, they talked about a lot of consistent barriers to recruitment and retention. Some of those things that I just mentioned, like poor work-life balance, issues with mental health, limited opportunities to advance in a career for wildland firefighting. But Grassroots Wildland Firefighters and as well as the federal union here are saying that uncertainty from recent workforce reductions and also agency reorganization efforts are making those long-time challenges much more heightened and much more difficult for firefighters. So even though the 2025 workforce reductions didn't directly impact federal wildland firefighters, Reva Duncan from the organization pointed out that separations in support roles for those agencies are still affecting the frontline workforce.
It still is a massive machine working behind the scenes that a lot of the public doesn't see. The logistics support, the mapping, the financial tracking, all of those things that support the wildland firefighters doing the tough and hazardous job. Of course, they're impacted by the losses of the workforce and the other positions.
And a lot of the firefighters are themselves seasonal workers, so they are hired on a recurring basis. What's the current staffing status there?
Well, I heard from the Department of Agriculture that they have 11,550 above that number seasonal staff members who have been hired and who are ready to deploy for the 2026 fire season. They say that that is surpassing the agency's staffing target earlier in the time frame than any past year since 2022. So they are staffing up in preparation for what's going to be an intense wildfire season this summer. But at the same time, many survey respondents are still reporting workforce shortages within their units. Survey results show that about 2/3 say that their units are operating below full strength staffing levels. Many discussed that there was inadequate staffing in certain fire activities, such as prescribed burns, which are done to prevent wildfires from being as intense during the summer season. So I think that there are ongoing difficulties with staffing levels, despite it being so staffed up and really ahead of schedule at this point in time.
The survey was done by an organization outside government. Have USDA or Interior said anything about the findings?
We did hear back from both agencies, and they both said that they do not comment on external surveys that are conducted of their workforce, but they generally said that they are committed to supporting the workforce. They're, working to offer increased pay and compensation and benefits to the firefighters, mental health services for those who might need them, and then also pointing out that the staffing levels that they're trying to achieve here would allow for requested time off to be granted to firefighters as they need it. So they were really emphasizing here that they are providing the resources, leadership, and support that the firefighters are going to need as fire season really gets underway.
Well, then it sounds like they're acknowledging that regardless of who conducted the survey, there are some real problems in managing this workforce. How are they addressing it in the longer term, and what might still be ahead?
Well, one thing that is important to point out here is there are some reorganization efforts going on both for the Interior Department and for the Forest Service, which between the two of them are the top federal government employers of wildland firefighters. So at the Forest Service, there are some reorganizations and relocations going on of mostly DC located staff, kind of those back office functions who are going to be relocated. And although that's not directly impacting the wildland firefighters, it's this idea, again, that there are concerns of that having indirect impacts on firefighters. And then at the same time, within the Interior Department, they are looking to consolidate all of their wildland firefighting programs into one organization. And that's causing some concerns from outside organizations. But at the same time, the agency says that that's meant to streamline and, make more efficient the wildfire response from the agency. But ultimately, especially looking at the Forest Service relocations, Reva Duncan, when I spoke with her, talked about concerns that those reorganization efforts are going to cause further exodus of at least some agency staff.
Now, I know they've said they're not going to get rid of positions, but they're going to relocate people. But a lot of those people aren't going to be able to relocate. We saw that with the last Trump administration when they moved the BLM headquarters to Colorado. People just can't always pick up and move. Their spouses have careers, their children are in school. So I think we're going to see a further reduction in the support personnel, the support folks on the ground.
It sounds like the theory will actually be tested when fire season really gets underway.
Absolutely. There's a lot to come, and very soon here, too.
That's Federal News Network's Drew Friedman. Drew, thanks for joining me.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You can find her story at federalnewsnetwork.com. The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton is produced by Eric White and Michelle Sandiford. Our web editor is Stephanie Wright. For the latest updates, stay with federalnewsnetwork.com or follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. I'm Terry Gerton. Thanks for listening.